nor can they be met by recourse to the experience of other cultures where these characteristics have not been prominent. Now, he's obviously talking nonsense, right? Because anybody who knows about Islamic law know that the Sharia, Maqasid al-Sharia, and the whole issue of madhabs and fiqh, people were thinking. You can't produce laws if you're not thinking. So obviously he doesn't know anything about Islamic civilization. Now he says, to understand and cope with our problems, we all need to know and to grapple with the Western experience, meaning that Western civilization is the key to development. If you want to develop, you have to adopt Western civilization, otherwise you will remain behind. Now, of course, they have their own proponents, supporters, and so on. And one of them is V.S. Naipaul. Naipaul states that the modern world is our universal civilization. All of us. It's our universal civilization, shaped chiefly by the West. Most people around the world who know of them want to benefit from the achievements of Western science and technology. Increasingly, they also want to participate in its political freedom. It's right. We are using technology. We don't have a problem with it. And of course, if you look at the Arab Spring, it shows that people want freedom, they want democracy. So I'm not sure what, the assumption that people don't want this thing obviously is not true. The evidence suggests that the society cannot achieve the full benefits of Western science and technology without a commitment to reason and objectivity as essential to knowledge and to the political freedom that sustains it and helps it move forward. Now, these ideas and institutions are the basis for modern liberal thinking about politics, the individual, and the society, just as the confident view of science and technology as progressive forces improving the lot of humanity, increasing man's capacity to understand and control the universe, has been the most powerful form taken by the Western elevation of reason. Okay. Now, the question is Western civilization in crisis? And I think the first problem is untrammeled or, the absolute emphasis on individual freedom. That's one of the big problems. And of course, also the absolute insistence on reason alone. And we look at these two things. First of all, look at individualism. Now, individual freedom, although it has greatly elevated the condition of the people who have lived in free societies, inevitably permits inequalities that are the more galling because each person is plainly free to try to improve his own situation and largely responsible for the outcome. Freedom does permit isolation from society and an alienation of the individual at a high cost to both. Because if you and an individual are concerned primarily with your own well-being, and I think we have seen this in some societies, people actually can isolate themselves completely. They don't feel a responsibility to the society in any way. And so that creates isolation, but also creates alienation. Nor are these the only problems posed by the Western tradition in its modern form. Whether it takes the form of assertion of the power of the individual to transform and shape his own nature, or of the modern totalitarian effort to change the nature of humanity by utopian social engineering, the temptation to arrogance offered by the ideas and worldly success of the modern West threatens its own great traditions and achievements. Of course, I'm quoting from somebody. All right, so the whole issue of focusing simply on individual interest, individual benefit, has created a serious problem in Western civilization. Now, the other one is relativism. At the same time, the foundations of freedom have also come into question. By now, the power of religion has faded. We know that. In the Western world, by and large, religion has become either of no significance or very little significance in most cases. So the power of religion has faded, and for many, the basis for modern political and moral order has been demolished. Because religion actually provides you a basis for a moral order. And then, of course, we hear about Nietzsche, who announced the death of God. Dostoevsky asserted that when God is dead, all things are permitted. So if we don't have any religion or religious values or moral values, then of course this is relativism. Anything and everything is permitted. Everything is considered to be relative. There are no absolutes. In this scheme of things, there is no fixed morality. So what is considered immoral today will be considered moral tomorrow. I would argue that consumerism, which is a fundamental characteristic of Western societies, of course also increasingly become a characteristic of the Muslim world, is a graphic symbol of materialism, which in turn is a consequence of the rejection of spirituality. Now, the next crisis is the whole issue of mastery over nature. Sustainable development is in response to the degradation and depletion of natural resources. So the original idea is that human society will develop when they acquire mastery over nature. But now people all over the world have realized that they are actually depleting the resources and degrading the resources. And so we have the whole idea of sustainable development, and we have had so many conferences with regard to that. So it means that actually in all societies they have to rethink the whole model of development. Okay, I don't want to go into more details here. Now, the issue of human rights. Is it the crisis? Yes and no. We know that human rights are always, held up in great esteem in Western societies and so on. But here is a problem. Despite its claims to be the upholder of human rights and the defender of Western civilization, like Mr. Donald Trump, who wants to keep, America free of Muslims, the U.S., okay, and its proclaimed objective of introducing democracy in the Muslim world, the U.S. currently is using the power of modern weapons to devastate country after country. So you speak about human rights on the one hand, and on the other hand, you use drones and massive firepower to kill thousands and thousands of civilians. So there is a whole issue of what really do you mean by human rights. Okay, so these are things. And then it says, if both religion and reason are removed, all that remains is will and power, where the only law is the law of the jungle. There is no protection for the freedom of weaker individuals or those who question the authority of the most powerful. Now we're coming to, I thought I would another 1 hour. Okay, major features of Islamic civilization. I'll go through it very quickly. It is a socio-moral and metaphysical view of the world, which has indeed contributed immensely to the rise and richness of this civilization. It is a civilization with a universal dimension. It is not associated with a particular geographic region, race, or historical era. It is an open civilization and is not averse to adopting positive features of other civilizations in the past, provided they do not run counter to the Islamic norms and values. It is a well-balanced civilization. It insists on equilibrium between the material and the spiritual dimensions of life. In fact, this moderation is the essence of Islamic thought and civilization. It permits of no excess, no neglect, no extremism, and no recklessness. Of course, ISIS does not talk about that. Now, looking at the past contribution of Islamic civilization, I'm just going to, there are many authors there, Sarton, Brifol, Le Bon, Draper, Arnold, Alfred Guillaume, Brown, Landau, and all of them have all acknowledged the contribution of Islamic civilization. Now, I want to read what Prince of Wales says. The contribution of Muslim Spain is a preservation of classical learning during the Dark Ages and to the first flowerings of the Renaissance, has long been recognized. But Islamic Spain was much more than a mere larder where Hellenistic knowledge was kept for later consumption by an emerging modern Western world. Not only did Muslim Spain gather and preserve the intellectual content of ancient Greek and Roman civilizations, it also interpreted and expanded upon that civilization and made a vital contribution of its own in so many fields of human endeavor, in science, astronomy, mathematics, algebra, law, history, medicine, pharmacology, optics, agriculture, architecture, theology, and music. The oldest university in the world, which is still functioning, is the 1100-year-old Islamic University of Fez in Morocco, known as Qarawiyyin. This old tradition of Islamic learning influenced the West greatly through Spain. In this land where Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived for the most part peacefully for many centuries, translations began to be made in the 11th century, mostly in Toledo, of Islamic works into Latin, often through the intermediary of Jewish scholars, most of whom knew Arabic and often wrote in Arabic. As a result, these translations, Islamic thought, and through it much of Greek thought, became known to the West, and Western schools of learning began to flourish. As European civilization grew and reached the high Middle Ages, there was hardly a field of learning or a form of art, whether it was literature or architecture, where there was not some influence of Islam present. Islamic learning became in this way part and parcel of Western civilization, even if with the advent of the Renaissance, the West not only turned against its own medieval past, but also sought to forget the long relation it had with the Islamic world. Now, Islamic civilization in crisis. Is this 20 minutes up or 30 minutes up? Right? No, it's 20 or 30? No, I'm got 30 minutes. Right, okay. Islamic civilization is Islamic civilization in crisis? Yes, some people will say yes and some people would say no. Let's see. The story of the resurgence of Islam is in many ways the story of the backlash against Western modernity and of the contradictions in Muslim societies. But Muslim rejection of consumption and individualism has resulted in an increase in outward religiosity. And of course, if we look around, we'll find even in South Africa, there's suddenly an upsurge in the number of tariqas. I don't know about the Cape, but certainly here in Durban and Johannesburg, it's very, very noticeable. So it is outward religiosity at the cost of a deeper sense of mission. This is unlikely to restore a genuine Islamic civilization at peace with itself and the outside world. The 1960s social and cultural revolutions in the West did not leave the world of Islam untouched. Greater familiarity with Western liberal values through foreign film and literature, through brought Islamic societies into closer contact with the ideas of democracy, free speech, and secularism. This ran alongside the rise of nationalism that was sweeping the developing world in the wake of decolonization and was joined in the 1970s by the emergence of political Islam. Okay, so these are the new challenges that Muslims are facing. And of course, the question is whether the Muslims are going to respond to the features of Western civilization and either adopt them or adapt them, or they're going to generate their own institutions based upon their own values and norms. And so, of course, that's a big debate itself. Now we let's look at democracy. If we look at Arab Spring, everybody's talking about democracy. The Americans want to impose democracy and so on. Now, if we reflect on the definitions of civilization which we mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we will know that one of its major features is a highly developed form of government. As I said earlier, you can't build a civilization in a state of instability. There has to be stability. But we are still debating whether shura is compatible with democracy. If we look at literature, some will say, oh, it's the same thing. Shura means democracy. Others will say, yes, no, they're totally incompatible. You can't, you can't, the one totally exclude the other, and others will say, no, we agree with some features and we don't agree with others. If we look at the political system of Muslim countries, they resemble a giant jigsaw puzzle. I mean, I don't know if there are any two Muslim countries which have the same system. They're all different. You look at the Gulf states, you look at Iran, you look at Turkey, and so on. So they're all very, very, of course, Libya was again totally different, Saudi Arabia is totally different, and so on. And then we're also debating whether we can accept democracy or we should be establishing a caliphate. Maybe the brothers in Turkey can tell us that. All right, then we have the whole issue of nationalism. All the Muslim countries, are nationalists. We are Egyptians, we are Syrians, we are Turks, we are Arabs, and so on and so forth. But the world has become a global village. And especially with social media, people are interacting with people across the world. And so the boundaries are not there. The boundaries are no longer there. There's people-to-people contact. So the question is whether Muslim countries still have to hold on to the notion of nationalism. And this is being eroded actually across the world now. Now, I want to quote from Al-Alawi, who was the ex-minister of Trade, Defense and Finance in Iraq. He wrote a book called The Crisis of Islamic Civilization. And I will just quote some things from him. He says, he contends that while Islam has proved resilient in the face of many challenges, other aspects of Islamic civilization have atrophied or died, and Islamic civilization is now undergoing a crisis. Alawi explores how Islamic civilization began to unravel under colonial rule, as its institutions, laws, and economies were often replaced by inadequate modern equivalents. Now, we come to the revival of Islamic civilization. I think this is my last section. Now, I want to first quote again here. Many young Muslims are discouraged when they see the poor standard of living of Muslims throughout the world and the limited opportunities. They also know the undeveloped status of technology within the Muslim countries in comparison with the West. From these observations, they immediately leap to the conclusion that the Muslim countries are backward because Islam cannot adapt itself to the changing conditions, cannot assimilate new knowledge. Some even go so far as to say that Islam is actually against progress and against scientific advancement. However, those Muslims who have studied the later part of Islamic history will know that this is a complete fallacy and misconception. Now, we look at the people who are actually engaging in this whole debate about civilization. So we look at, I will classify them into three groups: the traditionalists, the secularists, and the reformers. Now, I'm not going to go into any detail. I'm just using a symbol. I would say the traditionalists want to retain the foundation of Islam, just the foundation. They're not interested in the edifice. The secularists want to have the edifice, they're not interested in the foundation. And the reformers want both. They want foundation and edifice. You can guess what I'm going at. Now we look at Nobel Prize winners. Congratulations to Turkey. Right. We had three. One was Abdul Salam, back in 1979. He was from Pakistan. Then we had an Egyptian, Ahmad Zuwail, for chemistry in 1909. And we have Aziz Senakar in Turkey for chemistry last year, 2015. Why I'm mentioning this is that we don't have to be despondent. We have the foundation. We have the foundation. What we need to do is start building. Now the question I raised earlier, do we accept the theories and practices of Western civilizations and generate a Muslim response to them, or do we generate our own institution based on Maqasid al-Sharia, which is what Tariq Ramadan has been proposing for some time? Alawi argues that the modernizers, he calls them, have been seduced by a certainty of